Okay, guys, welcome to the first bi-weekly Patreon Q&A. So, bi-weekly, I mean, I'm going to be doing it twice a month. That's what I'm going to be aiming for. So, if your question didn't get answered this time, then go ahead. You can just, copy what you wrote a couple days ago and then paste it again on the one next week. And if it gets enough upvotes, then I will be answering it then. But yeah, it's going to be basically a democracy. I'm going to always be answering the questions that have the most upvotes, because I'm going to assume that means there's the largest number of people who want to know the answer to that question. So let's get started. So I'm just going to read them off. I organized them in the order of how many votes they had. So with 18 votes from Astruma, we all know we need to immerse to get good, but as far as I know, you never talked about your immersion setup or how to immerse in general, and not just the tools, which you've made a video on. But what a day in the life of immersing with AJAT slash MIA looked like before you were fluent. Immersion is the rock of MIA slash AJAT, but there's so little resources on how to actually set up the environment. And then someone else commented and said, very true. I would like to see more direct setup by step on the MIA website, and just follow along a good comprehensible guide would be great. So, yeah. So, I mean, there's nothing really. I mean, when I first read this question, I didn't know exactly what to say because it's kind of like, well, I've shown all the tools, and then you kind of just use all the tools. But if I was going to run through, like, I guess, a day in the life of me back when I was immersing hardcore, well, I'd wake up every day with an alarm, and then I'd shower, and then I didn't meditate back then. If I could go back now, I would have meditated first thing. I think that would have helped me a lot. But back then, I would basically just do all my reps first thing. I wouldn't listen to anything while doing my reps because I liked to focus, and try to concentrate on completely. And then after that, I'd probably either like if I had something until I had something to do that day, I would probably start like reading a book in Japanese or start yeah. Normally, I would try to do my reading early on, and then watch stuff later in the day because reading was always more challenging and took more energy, and so I would do that earlier in the day when I was more fresh. And so I would basically just sit and read until I had to go and do something. And then when I, would get up to go do something, I would I would just pop in my headphone because, like I said in the How to Immerse video, I would just always have headphones hanging out so that I could immerse at any time. And if I was going to make a meal or walk somewhere or get on the bus or do anything, then I would, instead of just listening to my like immersion pod, if it was going to be during a period of time more than like 10 minutes, then I would actually choose something like a podcast or uh, something else that was more like a deliberate choice that I wanted to listen to, like a continuous thing, like an audiobook or something. And so, like, if I was going to cook a meal and then eat it, I'd be listening to like a podcast or an audiobook during that time. And then, say I had to go to school. Well, then, like, on the way to school, I'd still be listening probably to my immersion pod. And, like, in school, once I got there, I'd have a book with me. So, like, if I got a class early, then I'd just pull out the book and I'd start reading the book. If there was like a 10-minute break, I'd like pull out the book and I'd read that book. Then when I got home, I'd probably try to read a little bit more, and then I'd make my cards. And then if I had to do homework or whatever for school or take care of other stuff, I'd do that. Um, if I could listen while doing the stuff I had to do, I would. And then in the evening, I would just sit down and like watch anime or watch a movie for like 2 to 3 hours, until I went to bed. And yeah, so it's really just like when you think about what is immersion, right? It's well, active listening, passive listening, background listening, plus active reading, and then I guess some passive reading if like your OS or your phones in Japanese or whatever language you're studying, and so you get some passive exposure to the written language that way. So really, it's just like first of all, no matter what you're doing, try to do passive immersion whenever you can. And that should be, no matter what type of lifestyle you have, you should be able to have over an hour a day, probably most people like a few hours a day of just passive immersion because, like, we all spend time eating, cooking meals, driving somewhere in the car, going somewhere on the bus, uh, taking a walk, exercising, or whatever. So, like, just fill in every single crack of your day possible with passive immersion, and then uh, use like split the actual blocks of time you have where you can actually sit down and focus on something to either reading a book or watching a TV show. That was really basically what I would do. It's kind of like, uh, yeah, it's kind of straightforward. I guess um, if there's any like specific tips I can give, because I feel like I'm not really answering this question. Um, I mean, that's pretty much just it. And then someone else commented again on this thing on that question, saying, "I'd love it if you also touched on the content you used, Matt. How do you constantly have 24-hour content stream that is both gauging and comprehensible?" Well, back in the day, I mostly just used anime because I really liked anime, and there was always more anime I wanted to watch because there's like I never even got through watching the classics. And like if you'd watch an anime, and like if I watched an anime and I liked it, then I'd look up that director and I'd find other anime by the same director. Or if I had like a voice actor I really liked, then I'd go and watch shows just because the voice actor did the voice of the main character. And same thing with like reading books. Like I would just Google like good Japanese authors in Japanese and try to find someone that looked interesting. If I found an author I liked, I'd read multiple books by the author. If there was like a topic I was interested in, I would just look for like a nonfiction book on that topic. Um, yeah, that like there was basically the more you get into this, the easier it becomes to find content because you constantly like if you're immersing yourself in Japanese, you just naturally start hearing about all these shows. And like a show will get referenced in a movie you're watching and you want to watch that, or you'll see that people like a Japanese person will like mention this other movie that you realize most Japanese people have seen, and so you want to go back and watch that, or you just get other recommendations. And so as you go to your journey, your list of stuff you want to watch just gets longer and longer to the point where you'll never be able to finish it. So you kind of just have to, I guess, until you can start getting into that groove where just through immersion you find more things you want to immerse with naturally. Um, then just like either Google good anime or good drama, good podcasts, like a lot of stuff of like that gets posted in the media section of the chat. Um, and I would, yeah, like I would. What I always did was I would actively watch stuff and then I would take the audio out of that and use that as background and passive immersion, like I said in my immersion video. So I recommend doing that. I like doing that. I never looked for like 24-hour TV streams or new streams or something that literally never repeated but always would be playing. I never used anything like that. You can use something like that. That's totally fine and cool if that like is what you like. I don't know. I guess I was just really into anime back in the day, and I liked to work with one particular material more closely, like watch it once actively, then watch it back, listen to it back multiple times, see if I could understand more. That was just my style that I liked, and it was engaging for me, so I did that a lot. Uh, yeah. Okay. John Brendel asks, "How can you manage both school, work, and MIA simultaneously?" Well, through sacrifices and efficiency. You gotta set up a routine so that you're not wasting any time, and you have to be efficient. You have to take advantage of all the tools that are at our disposal to make sentence cards efficiently, to have very quick, easy access to media and to immersion. Have a book with you in your backpack at all times that you can pull out and start reading. Have Anki on your phone so you can do reps whenever you have a minute. Like have headphones hanging out of your shirt that have Japanese playing all the time so you can pop it in at any moment, and cut out all the things in your life that aren't necessary because everyone has a lot of things in their life that aren't necessary. Like decide how much you want to get good at what the language you're studying in a decent period of time, and then maybe cut out some of your hobbies for a year or two of your life, or cut out some of your friends for a year or two of your life. If you have something like work or a very intensive form of school, then that takes up a huge amount of time in your and energy. And so if you also want to make MIA work, then you're going to have to sacrifice everything else that's not completely necessary. You can't really have a full-time job and, reach fluency in a foreign language in 2 years and have a bunch of fun hobbies and hang out with your friends all the time on the side. It's like those are three things, like three different giant time-consuming things that a normal life only has room for two of. So you just got to decide what your priorities are, and if you do want to make it work, I totally think it's possible. You just got to, like I said, make sure that you're being extremely efficient and using all your time and all the tools to be, get the most out of each moment that you have, and then cut out all the things that you don't really need from your life. And also, it is going to be very difficult. So cut yourself some slack. Don't feel bad. Don't feel, if you have a bad day and you don't get to do as much as you want to, or you gave in one day and wasted a bunch of time watching something in English, just, don't beat yourself up for it. Just accept that you're trying to do something extremely difficult and stuff like that is going to happen. It's not, no need to just, tell yourself negative things about yourself, So just get back up, try to get back on the horse and get started the next day. And yeah, try to, like Katsumoto said, compete with your average. Don't compare yourself to other people. Compare yourself to your average. So if you can get an average of 2 hours of immersion time every day, then try to aim for 2 hours and 1 minute, and then every day, and then if you can get 2 hours and 1 minute to be your average of immersion time every day, then try to go for 2 hours and 2 minutes. So just focus on what you can do, not how much you wish you could do or how much other people are doing, and just always try to be, improving your process, improving your workflow, and expanding your own personal average bit by bit. That's what I would say. So Ethan O'Brien says, do you think if you're at the monolingual stage, having grammar cards that deal with grammar points, or if you think you're at the monolingual stage, having grammar cards in English is a better idea? I was going to add a card for mai, arumai, in parentheses, but the monolingual definition is ridiculously long and complex. Vocabulary definitions are not a problem for me with the monolingual dictionary. Okay, so looking up vocabulary words in the monolingual dictionary isn't a problem, but you're saying that grammar is giving you some trouble. So should you just use the English dictionary? And I would say no, because although the example, something like mai in the dictionary might look extremely long and complex, it's actually not. It's actually extremely simple. Let me try to show you. Let's look at it right now. So here, so I'm just going to be looking at Daijin for now. So here it is. So yeah, that looks crazy long and complex. I feel you. But if we really look at what this is, so, nai. I typed in nai and not mai. Oops. Okay, even longer and even more complex. But most of this you can ignore. That's the thing that I'm going to try to help you realize now. So what this is, it says right here, it's jodoshi, which in English is a auxiliary verb. Here are the different forms that it can, it's different conjugations, and it looks like it doesn't conjugate. This is the history of the word, how it came to be the modern form, and you don't need to know that. This is telling you how it connects to words, because if it's a jodoshi, that means it attaches onto verbs, and verbs have different forms they conjugate into. So it has to tell you what forms it attaches onto. But you don't need to know that, because you're not trying to use grammar to produce Japanese. You're trying to use grammar to understand Japanese. So all you need to do is understand it. And so you don't really have to worry about what forms the verbs are going to be in and everything like that, because you're just going to be able to basically, intuitively grasp that over time through exposure. So now here, 1, we have the actual definition. Uchikeshi no suiryo no i o arowasu nai daro. So that's the whole definition, really. And that's all you really need. So it says, uchikeshi, this means negative, to negate. And you should definitely learn that word if you don't know it because it's used in grammar type cards or grammar type definitions all the time. And then suiryo, which means to like guess or predict or make an estimate or to infer. And so that basically means you are guessing or inferring that it's going to be the negative of the thing, and then it just gives you a modern day translation, nai daro. And so if you know what nai daro means, then you know, okay, mai just means that. And then it just says right here that actually it's more normal to just say nai daro instead of mai, but it has right here, kono tenki de wa yama ni noboru hito mo aru mai. So with this, in this kind of weather, people who are going to go who are going to climb a mountain or go hiking there aren't probably any people like that. So there probably aren't any people who are going to go climb a mountain. So if you see that right here, you can just say hito mo nai daro. So it's like aru mai, and then you can just replace it with nai daro. And basically, if you go and read these other ones, they're going to be very slightly different versions of the same meaning. And sometimes it does this where, from a bird's eye point of view, you realize that it only has one meaning and all of these are the same meaning, but it's more like giving you specific ways that that one meaning is represented. But really, you don't have to worry about that. What I would do is just go with the first one, read whatever this first sentence is, and forget the original sentence you found it in. And then if you learn this sentence, then probably next time you come across mai, you'll know what it means, right? Like you can replace it with naidaro, whatever in your head, it'll make sense. So then you can ignore basically all these other meanings, or you can try to read them because they're not that complicated. Like this one says, uchikeshi no ishi o arawasu. So instead of it being an estimate or an inference, now it's being your like an intention. So nai tsumori da, nai you ni shio. So anna tokoro e wa nidoto iku mai. So I'm never gonna go to that place again. Then 当然適当の意の打ち消しを表す。So べきではない。So then it shouldn't be like that. してはならない。するな。Don't do that. So you realize it's basically just a very general negative. And so there's different things that can be negating, but it's all just a negative. But these are not hard to understand, these individual little things, right? And the other thing is that the reason why I don't think you should resort to the English dictionary is that, like, this word, kinshi, 当然適当、打ち消し. So these are words that are always used in grammar. And just like with how I explained, there's dictionary words that are pretty much not very commonly used in everyday speech, but they commonly show up in the definitions of vocab words again and again. That's the same exact thing with grammar. So once you learn like these common grammar Japanese words, kinshi, uchikeshi, and then the names of particles, shujoshi means like final ending particle, then it'll become very easy very quickly. So I think it's good to invest the effort to learn it in Japanese, like to learn the vocab that you need to understand in Japanese, and then because when you actually come across it, instead of replacing it with some English definition that's less accurate, it's better to just replace it with nai tsumori da or nai daro or whatever. And then here at the end we have again more history about how the usage changed over time, and you don't need to worry about that. So I just went over that specific example, but basically it's not as hard as you would think. That's kind of, I would say, an illusion, and you can handle it if you just think of it as similar to when you first got into using the monolingual dictionary for vocab words, right? It was very hard, but then very quickly kind of you figure out what's going on, and then it gets easier very rapidly, right? There's kind of like a learning curve. It's going to be the same way with grammar, so I recommend doing that. Okay, Cherry Cola asks, did you mention at some point you knew someone who had gotten fluent just by watching anime with no study involved? I'd definitely be interested in hearing more about that. So yeah, I've known 3 people so far who have gotten good pretty much just from watching anime. The first was when I was a freshman in high school and I first started learning Japanese, but I didn't know anything about AJAT or language learning philosophy, so I pretty much was just like actually taking Japanese classes at high school and getting better at like a snail's pace and making literally no progress. but there was this table of Japanese kids at my school, and some of them were actually from Japan and their parents moved here for work and they didn't speak English. Some of them were half Japanese, and some of them were, Japanese, but they were born here and they could speak both. And they would like just sit at this table and speak Japanese, and I would like watch from afar and think that it was super cool and be really jealous that I couldn't speak Japanese. And there was one girl who would occasionally hang out with that group who was actually Chinese by descent, and she was like just a big anime fan, and I mean, I don't know how good she actually was because I sucked at the time. To me at the time, she sounded like completely fluent, but that could have been the fluency illusion, so I don't know how good she actually was. But she seemed like totally fluent to me. And I asked her like, how'd you learn Japanese? And she said, well, I just watched anime from like starting when I was pretty young, like online. I would watch with subtitles, and then after a few years I didn't need the subtitles anymore, and then after a few years I could speak it too. And so that was the first case. The second case is one time I made this Japanese friend online through Skype channel, and we were just talking, and he told me about this Japanese or this American girl that she knows who's like 16, and she also just learned learned Japanese through watching anime with subtitles. Sounds like a very similar story. And then one time he like put us in a call, and she was really good. Like she had like pretty good accent, pretty good grammar and usage, like not perfect, and I could kind of nitpick a lot of stuff, but overall, like she could totally speak Japanese, understand everything, and was like super impressive. But at that point, she wasn't only watching anime; she was also like regularly talking to Japanese people online and like getting a lot of immersion. But she basically started just by watching anime. It seems like she never did any study. She couldn't read pretty much at all though, and she like didn't really know that much kanji or anything. So there was that. But in terms of actually speaking, she sounded really great, and she learned just from anime. And there was and then the last person I know is someone who Fermi introduced me to. Fermi is a Japanese guy in the chat who basically did MIA in reverse to learn English, and when you just talk to him on chat, you'd think he was a native speaker. And he has had this Singaporean friend who also learned Japanese just through anime, and now is like extremely fluent, and now is also putting in effort to study and get better. But like he showed it to me because he said he was the only foreigner that he's ever met who had like perfect pitch accent or like close to perfect pitch accent. And that guy also knew Chinese like natively because he grew up in Singapore. So that could have helped him a lot with pitch accent. But yeah, he pretty much just watched anime with subtitles and then picked it up. There's not really much more to it than that. And I know, all these people, they didn't even intend to learn Japanese. They just loved anime and watched anime for probably hours every day. And they were using English subtitles, but the common thread here is that they all started this when they were very young, like probably before they were 10 years old. They started watching anime regularly. And I think that maybe this might have to do something with the fact that they were below the critical period or whatever, where, it becomes a lot harder to learn a foreign language. And so even though there were subtitles, they were able to still listen and pick it up pretty naturally and effortlessly. And I still think that you could easily do this today. Like as an adult, no matter how old you are, you could still do this. If you just sat down and watched anime for enough hours, you would learn Japanese. But the thing is that if you have English subtitles on there, then your brain's going to filter out the Japanese. I think that only can really work if you're a kid, or you like force yourself to actually not like listen to the Japanese as closely as you can and only glance at the English subtitles. But most people are not going to be able to do this unless they've like mastered meditation. So yeah, so it's definitely possible to get really good just through immersion alone. Reading is kind of a different story because if you don't do something systematic like RTK, it's extremely hard to learn how to read unless you're like using a bunch of like fancy tools like, text hookers and pop-up dictionaries and stuff. But yeah, just proof that input before output and the input hypothesis, really. So then Carlos asks, what kind of content will be on the MAA site and when? I'm really keen on having a guide to help cover most areas beginners and intermediates get stuck on. So, well, first I'm going to continue my series on Anki on the site. Like I just, made a long post series about Loki Anki, and I'm going to make another shorter series on optimizing your retention rate and summarizing all everything I learned through my few weeks of studying that, and then also just a few other more like posts about using add-ons and what you should set all your other settings to and things like that. After that, I'm going to start like the total MIA guide, and it's going to have a section on meta theory, which is like how do you know what advice to trust, how do you balance theory over practice, and kind of like a really bird's eye view on like how do you manage your own studying. And then I'm going to have a post on language, or basically a series of posts on language acquisition theory, like input before output, the language, like the input hypothesis, and what role does the SRS play in the broader picture of learning, that kind of stuff. And then I'm going to have more a section on like how to implement things more practically, I guess. And I haven't totally worked this whole thing out yet, but I'll have like sections on like, okay, this is how the SRS works. This is how you should use it. This is how you should set up your immersion environment. This is what you should do when this happens. This is what you should do when this happens. Like all just like really practical stuff. I'm gonna have another section on like basically similar to Katsumoto's mental tools, where I talk about why meditating will help you a lot, and other basically what mindsets you need to adopt in order to be successful, and other like psychological advice, because that's a big issue, right? Like knowing what to do is only half the battle, right? The other battle is actually doing it. And so, and that all basically comes down to your relationship to your own mind, right? And your own behavior. So I'm going to also, I think that's really important. I think Katsumoto was really wise for focusing on that, but I'm going to come at it from a little bit of a different angle than Katsumoto, and it will be kind of informed by my experience meditating and other things like positive psychology, and maybe even other like some of the philosophy of mastery, because there's like some literature on mastery as like an abstract idea, and there's certain principles that have been shown to help achieve mastery at certain things, like finding high yield techniques and like assessing your progress at different stages and things like that. And that's also kind of part of meta theory as well. And then and then there'll be some other stuff like success stories and like things like that. But yeah, basically like my goal is to have basically just a chronological series of articles that people can read and then learn everything that they need to learn Japanese or another language to a high level. And I'm going to try to introduce things very like gradually to not overwhelm people. Like there's so many things you can do, so many tools you can use to optimize your efficiency. Like there's people making scripts that help you save time making sentence cards, and there's other people like there's tools like Subs to SRS that you can use. There's all these different ways that you can go about obtaining content, like downloading content legally and illegally, and like things like that. And so even just like how to use Anki efficiently or effectively and stuff like that, right? So if I just try to dump all of this on someone at once, that's going to be way too much information, and they're probably going to burn out and just get really stressed and frustrated. So instead, I'm going to actually kind of suggest that people start very simple and basic. Like really just start with like hey, first learn how to use Anki. Make all your cards by hand. Just type them all out. And get in the habit of doing your reps every day. Then like maybe just choose like one source of immersion. Like maybe find like a manga website that you like, or like find a YouTuber that you like, and just start with that. Then once you get used to that, then you can start spreading it to other sources. When you can start implementing more like tools that up your efficiency and up your workflow. You can start adding more add-ons. You can start tinkering with your Anki settings, but gradually, so that people don't get overwhelmed, because there really is a lot of information and things to learn if you want to get to that point where you're functioning optimally. And so like right now there's a lot of videos on my channel how to do cool stuff, like hey, how to download subtitles from Netflix, how to get on Japanese Netflix, how to like do this with VLC, and like how to download audiobooks and all this stuff. but I think it's kind of overwhelming for someone that's brand new. So I want to kind of try to come up with a way to introduce that stuff gradually so people will know they're not going to be missing out on anything, but also not feel overwhelmed like they have to do too much stuff at once. So hopefully, and like I want the writing on the site to be extremely clear cut and straightforward. I'm not going to try to be funny. I'm not going to try to make it like write in a kind of fancy style or anything. I just want it to be completely clear and straightforward with nothing extra. Just like the raw information explained linearly and logically such that it's easy to grasp and it all makes sense in like a bigger picture. So, like, I've kind of been going back and reading some of the AJAT articles recently and realized that, I mean, no offense to Katz, but he did an awful job of that. A lot of the articles are all over the place. There's no logical, like, structure to many of the articles. It's really like he's just rambling as stuff comes to his mind. They're filled with irrelevant little, references to pop culture and things like that that do not really add anything practically to the article. And also, all the ways that information is distributed across the articles themselves have pretty much no structure, and and that's why it's so hard to get into AJAT, because you basically just have to read all these articles and plow through all this irrelevant information and slowly put together the pieces in your mind just using like deductive reasoning and things like that. So I'm going to try to get rid of all those problems, make it very clear and straightforward. And I also want to set it up so that people can start taking action before they have read the entire site. So it's like, okay, this is what you need to get started. Read this. It takes like 3 hours to read. Then get started. And then you can, like, after the 1 week, you can read this other section and, like, slowly introduce people to it. Yeah, that's how I want to set it up. It's going to take a lot of planning to make sure that because I have to come up with the structure ahead of time to make this possible. But I think I'm going to be able to make something that's going to really help a lot of people. I'm really excited about that. So thanks for that question. Louis DeBrat. When repping, what counts as a known card? I find that sometimes I didn't actually remember the word or wouldn't have recognized it in a different context. But I read the whole sentence. The meaning of the word comes back. Oh, but because I read the whole sentence, the meaning of the word comes back. In other words, I recognize the word around it, but not the word itself. Is this a pass or a fail? I would say, so basically you're saying that you read a sentence and you know what the word means because of the rest of the sentence, but you felt like if you were shown the word out of context, then you really wouldn't know what it meant. So I would say in this case, you should probably fail the card, because if you're using the Loki Anki setup, failing the card really isn't too big of a penalty, right? All you're doing, like if you're using the no penalties, no boosting add-on, and your new interval at lapse is set to 70%, then you're really just pushing the card back just a little bit. You're still retaining most of your progress, and then you'll get a chance to make it a little bit more solidified before you send it back on its way of growing more healthily and more quickly. So I would say, yeah, if you feel like you don't really know that word as well as you would like to, then just fail it once, really relearn it and then keep it on its way. Because like I talked about in the Loki Anki articles, you want to avoid the situation of keeping your card in a half-learned limbo forever, where you don't know it very well and you click good, so it comes back up. You still don't know it very well, so you press good. In the article I was talking about using hard, which is even more harmful, but it can happen with good as well. So you're better off just like relearning it properly once and then having it stay healthy after that. So I would say in the exact context you just said, I would probably just fail the card, and then because also the experience of failing a card really does like re-solidify things in memory. So Felipe Mueller asks, what if I stop with SRS and instead use the time I spend on creating and reviewing cards to instead just consume more content? I wish you would have specified how far you are in the process, because that really changes things, right? As a beginner, the SRS can help you gain a foundation very quickly and also remove a lot of the frustration of trying to pick things up when you're brand new in the language. You don't need an SRS. Like, you can definitely at any stage get rid of the SRS, and as long as you are immersing, you will still get good. But I think that for up until you start to get pretty advanced, using the SRS for a half an hour to an hour a day is going to speed up the total rate at which you progress. If you really don't like the SRS and you feel that you're confident that you can pick things up just from context, then yeah, it's a pretty fine option, really. You can give it a go. You can try it for a few months and see how it feels. And if you feel like, yeah, I know I'm still getting better really quickly, I feel like this time is better spent on more immersion than on doing Anki, then yeah, keep it up. Just me personally, I know that using the SRS for an hour each day combined with immersion helped me improve extremely quickly. It helped me gain an extremely large passive vocabulary, and I really feel that I I wouldn't have gotten as good as I was if I was just immersing and I didn't have that extra component of a little bit more focused study. But I definitely so that's why I recommend it, right? I think that the combination of moderate SRS usage with mass immersion gives you a better result than just immersion. Otherwise, obviously, I wouldn't. But I still think that, especially if you are looking things up and you are intentional when you consume media and you actually immerse a lot, then yeah, you can still definitely continue to get better. And maybe for some people, that style of learning would suit them better than using the SRS. So if you're really interested in this, I would say give it a shot and see what happens. Compare it to your experience of using the SRS, and then you'll know. Um, but yeah, clearly lots of people get good without the SRS. It's not a necessary component. I think for me, it actually reduced stress in certain ways because I knew that I could take a week off and not lose as much, right? And I never really did take a week off, but when things come up, the SRS can really maintain a lot of your knowledge and really kind of slow down the speed at which regression happens if in the case that you don't get an opportunity to immerse. And I really liked that. If I was only ever using the SRS, it would really feel like, oh, I have like if I don't know every second I'm not immersing, I'm forgetting stuff. I'm getting worse, and who knows, maybe that will lead to even more immersion. That's that sense of urgency of if I don't immerse, that's the only thing keeping my knowledge intact. So yeah, it's kind of a different style of learning overall, and it's not one that I've explored that much. But especially once you start getting better, you definitely don't need the SRS to learn. So yeah, those are kind of my thoughts on that. So um, Ardpeer says, I would love to see you make a new accessible practical introduction to pitch accent for beginners. I know you have a few videos about the topic, one that confuses me a lot, but I can't find a single satisfying one anywhere on the internet in clear and concise language for the beginner and beginner AJAT audience. I'm relatively new here, so I haven't seen all the discussions, so sorry if this comment is redundant, but I was just watching a video by Japenzi where someone has posted this. As a fan of Matt, you probably have seen the video where he says that he thought accent should be acquired subconsciously, but then realized it should be studied early on and that he wished he had learned pitch accent theory. So I hope there will be someone who can teach this to a beginner like me now to be better prepared for this in the future. Okay, so yeah, I do recommend that you start studying pitch accent theory pretty early on, not as a complete beginner, but maybe from 6 months to a year into learning Japanese. I still think that after completing the monolingual transition would be a good time to do this. Before that, it's going to be too much and it's going to slow you down a lot to be thinking about that. Well, because, when you're a beginner, it takes all of your brain power just to comprehend written and spoken Japanese without worrying about accent. When you start worrying about pitch accent, it's a whole nother layer of things that your mind has to keep track of. And like even I didn't start worrying about pitch accent until I was already fluent, and it still was extremely taxing on my mind to be trying to keep track of that and think about that while I was reading and listening. So I think if you try to do it too early on, it's going to slow you down and it's going to be unproductive. But yeah, so when you are 6 months to 1 year in, right now Dogen's pitch accent series sounds like it's pretty much exactly what you're looking for. If you subscribe to Dogen's Patreon at $10 a month, you can get access to a series of 30 10-minute videos about where he explains pitch accent like very clearly with many examples, like exactly kind of what you're looking for beginners. So that's what I would recommend. I'm assuming that you didn't know about that, or you maybe wouldn't have been asking this question. But I do want to also make my own pitch accent resource that's going to be for, well, beginners to pitch accent, not to complete beginners of Japanese. But But I also want to make it quite comprehensive because no pitch accent resource um, exists at all that's completely comprehensive and covers everything that you need to know to, have a complete model of how pitch accent works. But because that's going to be a huge project that takes many months, it's not something I'm going to be working on like in the near future, because right now my priority is getting up, building the basics of the website, which I explained, a couple minutes ago. Um, but so for now, I would recommend Dogen series to get started and learn the basics, and then after that, once you get a little bit more advanced, I recommend using the NHK Accent Dictionary and the Shinmeikai Accent Dictionary, to learn some of the more finer details, because they both have long sections in the back where they explain pitch accent theory pretty in a lot of depth. Like I said, not as much as the resource that I want, but quite a good amount of depth. And if you look on the resource sheet of the server, I actually posted PDFs of the backs of the books of both of those, so you don't have to pay $100 for the $2. But yeah, so yeah, I would check out Dogen series. Josh asks, what should I do if the dictionary lists more than one pitch accent for a particular word? Should I remember all the pitch accents for that word? Yeah, so when a dictionary lists multiple pitch accents for a word, that typically means that it can be pronounced multiple ways. And normally the number that comes first will be the one that's more dominant. But it's it's kind of tricky territory, because some words actually will be pronounced. Okay, well, first of all, sometimes you look up a word and, like, for me, in my Qualbry setup, which I can just show you again real quick. In my Qualbry setup, so I have 3 dictionaries that tell me pitch accent. I have NHK, I have Daijin, and I have Shinmeikai. Now, some words, like, for example, so teido. So NHK says that atamadaka is dominant.
Teido.
Daijin says that heiban is dominant, and then Shinmeikai says that atamadaka is dominant. So you can see that there is some disagreement here. And I've seen this many times where there's disagreement between the dictionaries. And so which one do people actually use more commonly? I mean, that could depend, like, on the exact part of Japan that you're in. It could depend on the age of the person. Sometimes there's differences between, different generations. And, sometimes the information in the dictionary is out of date. And sometimes you can really use either one, and you will hear people using either one. And sometimes, like, one of them, like, for example, I remember, like, with kikai to mean chance. I think that wait. So yeah, so like kikai to mean opportunity. If you look it up in the dictionary, it says like that it's nakadaka or heiban, but nakadaka is more dominant. And in that case, like, I asked my Japanese friend, and he says that to him, heiban, kikaya's heiban sounds like completely wrong, and it's always like kikai. So that basically means that it says it can go either way, but in reality, it's almost always only one. And so basically, but there's other times, like I said, where they actually do use both of them. So basically, just like looking at the dictionary, if it has 2 different pitch accents, that pretty much means that it's not that clear cut, and you're not going to know exactly what it means. So what I would do is I would just memorize both and the order, and then start keeping track. Because, sorry, I'm not explaining this very well, but, like, basically, if a word has 2 pitch accents, all that stuff I just explained, the point of that is that what that means is that you don't actually know what the reality of that word is. You don't know if A, it actually is pronounced both ways, B, if it is almost always pronounced one way, and if so, which one of the 2 ways is actually the more dominant one, or like C, is there like differences between generations or whatever. And so when it has 2, I would be like, oh, I don't really know what's going on here. And so I would just memorize both of them and the order, and then start listening in real Japanese to try to, start, taking down data. And if you hear it, you hear that, you hear it 5 times, and every single one of those 5 times, it's always pronounced with one of the two accents, then just in your mind, just start thinking of it as, oh, it's only this one, and then you can drop the other one. So until you gather enough real data from real Japanese to decide which one is more dominant in the way of speaking which you want to speak, like based off of your parent or your immersion, then I would memorize both, but it's almost like it should be like a tentative hypothesis, right? So if it has both in the dictionary, memorize both. That's your tentative hypothesis. And then once you gather enough data from real Japanese, then drop the one that seems to be not being used, unless actually both are used, in which case you would still just keep that in your head. So I'll answer two more. I said I would, or three more, because the five. Okay, I'll do a few more. I said this would be 45 minutes, but I spent a lot of time on a few questions, so I'll do five more because I see these five, and two of these are going to be really quick. So Nanashi says, when sentence mining several times now, I've encountered a word I thought was new, only to search for it in my deck and find I already created a card for it and had just not recognized it due to not learning it thoroughly enough or forgetting it already. In these cases, is it better to A, intentionally have two or more cards for the same word, or B, keep only one sentence, reworking the old one so it sticks better, or deleting it for the new one? So, and he has a little bit more, but I'm just going to address what he just said. So, I wouldn't, in general, I would not make multiple cards for one word. And what I sense in your question, which is something I see a lot of people doing, is this kind of assumption that you should learn words fully from the SRS. I made a card for this word. I had a card for this word. I learned the card. Therefore, I know the word. And if I find in my immersion that the word comes up and I don't know it, then something has gone wrong. And I would say that this isn't a good way to think about it. And this isn't really how things work out in reality. In reality, the only way to fully learn a word is to get exposure to it many, many times in your immersion. And basically, having a card for it is just priming your mind in order to start that process, or have that process of learning it through exposure in real immersion happen more quickly and more efficiently. So this is a super normal thing that's going to happen to you all the time. You shouldn't think of it as something going wrong, like, oh, what? I made a card for the word and then I didn't know it. Something is wrong here. Something is broken. That isn't the case. Because basically, right, once you you had this experience of you came across a word in your immersion, you didn't know what it was, you went to make a card for it, and then you found, oh, I already had a card for it. But in that moment, right, when you just made a new connection in your brain, right, because you saw this word, you looked at it, you thought you didn't know it, and then you remembered, oh, I did know it. It was the one from this sentence. So that experience right there is very powerful, and it makes a very strong memory. And even without doing anything, because of this experience that you just had, it's extremely likely that from that point onward, you're going to recognize that word every time it comes up and know what it means, right? So you could say that, so really, you shouldn't think of this experience of coming across a word, not knowing it, looking it up, and finding that you had a sentence for it. You shouldn't think of that as a failure. You should think of it as basically what was supposed to happen. It's part of the process. And that aha moment of, oh, this thing that, like, you made a new connection, right? There were these two separate things of what the word looked like in the wild, like outside of a context, and then the knowledge you had of it that was reliant on the context. You just made a connection there. You just extended your knowledge from the specific context of that one flashcard to, making it more broad so that you can recognize it in different types of circumstances, right? And so basically, I would expect this to happen, and I wouldn't think of it as really being anything wrong. And so you don't need more cards. What you need is more exposure to Japanese. It's like real immersion. And so what you can do is, you can reset the card if you want. You can do nothing if you want. But that's what I would do. I would either just reset the interval on the card, or I would just do nothing, because I think that experience you just had probably solved your problem on its own. Okay, so, and so yeah, just before I go into that, because I wanted to emphasize this idea that don't expect the SRS to solve all your problems and get you to the point where you automatically know words. It's just making it it's priming you to pick up things from your immersion more quickly. But all the true acquisition still only happens in immersion. And so it's good to calibrate your expectations to match that. And even when this doesn't happen, and even when you come across it in your immersion, and you're like, and most of the time, you probably will know that you have a card for it. It'll be like, oh, I have a card for this. Oh, but crap, I can't really remember what it means. And then it'll be like, oh, what was it again? I think it was the sentence kind of looked like this. What was it? And then you'll have to look it up at that time, and then it'll be like, oh, yeah, I remember now. And that experience right there, that aha moment, that is what really burns it into your brain and like makes you know it a lot deeper. So this is why I always use the metaphor of glow sticks, right? You know what a glow stick is, right? Like when, it was just Halloween, maybe you saw some of them. So when you get a glow stick, you go and buy it at the store. It's like a little tube and it's not glowing. It has this like dull colored liquid in it, right? And no matter how long you just have it there in your house, it's never going to start glowing. But once you break it, and you break the little glass inside so that the two different chemicals mix together and you shake it up, it starts to glow. So basically, after learning a word with the SRS, you now have an unbroken glow stick. But through coming across it multiple times in your immersion, having those aha moments, you're breaking it up and shaking it up and making it glow. And then you know the word. Because basically, if you learn a word through a single flashcard, then it's very understandable that your knowledge of the word becomes dependent on the context of the flashcard. It becomes context dependent. I talked about this in the Loa Kianki setup. But the way that doesn't, you still know it, right? Just you know it in a context dependent way. And so to extend that out so that you know it in a context independent way, you just have to have that aha experience. And so basically, when you have those experiences of coming across a word in the wild that you can't remember the meaning of, even though you have a card and you look it up, that is part of the process that's supposed to happen. That is you engaging in the process that leads to you growing your vocabulary very quickly. So I would think of that as what's supposed to happen. So Tae Min Han asks, you occasionally talk about how you felt the need to study earlier Japanese, parenthesis, middle Japanese, to get a fuller grasp on modern Japanese. 1. What was the weak spot that you were trying to address by going this direction? So 2 things. 1 is that the way that foreigners are taught grammar when they study Japanese as a foreign language, and the way that Japanese people think about the grammar of their own language are completely different. Like, very fundamentally different. Like, in the way that foreigners are taught Japanese, they're taught, like, okay, there's a verb in dictionary form, and then the dictionary form of the verb has a te form, and this is how you conjugate to the te form. But in the way that Japanese people think about grammar, verbs have 5 different forms, and like one of the forms is used when the thing that's attaching on to the verb is either a particle or a certain kinds of auxiliary verbs. And so basically, like if you put it in a verb into mas form, right? Like you have like taberu and you have tabemasu. So basically it becomes tabe, right? So that in Japanese is thought of as the renyoke, which is the form when like things like auxiliary verbs or particles attach on. And so in Japanese, te is thought of as a particle. So it's just tabete is not the te form, it's just taberu in renyoke plus the particle te. And if you have like yomu, it's yomimasu, right? So yomi is the renyoke. So it's just yomite. But because that's hard to say, this thing called a renbin happens, which is where sounds change to make it easier to pronounce. And it goes from yomite to yonde. And so they think of it very differently, right? And so going back to one of the first questions I answered about learning Japanese in grammar, learning grammar in Japanese using the monolingual dictionary, it explains all those things in terms of the way that a Japanese person has, right? Like in that first section where it was talking about how things attach onto other things, it's saying, okay, what it's going to say is that, for example, mai can attach onto the shushike of verbs. And so you have to know what shushike is if you want to know what that really means and learn the grammar from the dictionary. And so first of all, I knew, okay, in order to basically well, first of all, it just gives you a deeper understanding of Japanese because, in my opinion, it more accurately represents what's happening in like the mind of Japanese people. In this the way that Japanese people learn it. By the way, in Japanese, they call the way that foreigners are taught grammar Nihongo Bunpo, and they call the way that Japanese people are taught grammar in high school Gakko Bunpo. So I think Gakko Bunpo is like represents Japanese better. It gives you a deeper understanding. It allows you to learn Japanese grammar from Japanese from the monolingual dictionary. And so I knew I wanted to learn that. And the other thing, and the thing is that Gakko Bunpo looks at grammar basically from a classical Japanese perspective because classical Japanese had more complicated grammar than modern day Japanese. There was more different forms that verbs could conjugate into. There was one more form. There was more different types of verbs because there's different types of verbs and each verb conjugates into the 5 forms differently. And there was a bunch of other features that existed in classical Japanese but not in modern day Japanese, like kakari musubi and other things like that. And so basically, if you learn the grammar of classical Japanese, you pretty much automatically learn Gakko Bunpo because you're getting like a more complicated version, and then you can just see like, oh, like so in modern day Japanese, like rentaike and shushike became the same thing. They like combined into one. And like, oh, in modern day Japanese, like the shimo ichidan verbs all became like kami ichidan verbs. And so it's like you see this systematic transformation. And so it's basically so. And then to give the last piece, why I wanted to learn classical Japanese. So, like if you there's in Japanese there's something called kotowaza, which is like proverbs, right? So proverbs are written in classical Japanese grammar. It's different than modern day grammar. And so although you can just memorize these proverbs like verbatim and not understand what's going on, I didn't like that. I felt like, how come I can't just read it and understand it? How come I can only know what it means when I read the explanation of it? Like Gio mite sezaru wa yu naki nari, and like what miru wa what is it? Ikken wa hyakubun ni shikazu, or ones like that. I wanted to actually know what was going on with the grammar, and so and also even not even with the proverbs, but just things like if you ever hear like erabarashi mono. Why is it erabarashi mono? That's like a common phrase in Japanese, and not erabareta mono. Well, it's because erabarashi is the old form of ta in classical Japanese. Or like if you say yuki naki hito. Why is it yuki naki instead of yuki nai? Well, because naki is nai in classical Japanese. And so there are still little bits and pieces of Japanese all over. And of course, you don't need to learn classical Japanese to understand them. You can just memorize it verbatim, like, oh, erabara shimono means erabara mono. But I just wanted to have a deeper understanding personally. And also, I knew that all Japanese people learned that in high school. And even though they mostly forget it and get really blurry on it, they still like knew it at some degree, at some level, And so I wanted to catch up to natives in my understanding of how the language works. And so basically, learning classical Japanese allowed me to do a few things. It allowed me to understand classical, like all these different proverbs, understand haikus, understand the little bits and pieces, and then it automatically let me understand Gakko Bunpo as well, which let me understand grammatical explanations in Japanese. It let me understand how Japanese people describe their own grammar, and I both felt like that was extremely valuable. So then he also asked how did you study? So basically, I just bought a basic classical Japanese grammar guide in Japanese, and I SRS'd the whole thing. Like I would just read a page, and then I would just like make closed cards and Q&A cards to memorize the whole thing. Like I actually studied it like how like traditional language learners study the grammar. It was like I'd memorized the 5 forms or I don't remember if it was 5 or whatever. I'm kind of blurry on it now. But I would memorize the different forms that there was, that verbs could that the different types of verbs and how you knew what type of verb a word was, and then like for this type of verb, what when it like how do you conjugate it into denyoke? I would just have like Q&A questions like for all that stuff, and I just basically I did it a little bit at a time. Like I did like a half an hour a day for like a few months until I had SRS that entire book, and that pretty much did it. So then it said, did it address your perceived weakness to your satisfaction? Yeah, totally. I felt like I had gained a superpower after that. My understanding of Japanese was so much deeper. I loved being able to read those grammatical explanations in the Japanese dictionary, understand it perfectly. I loved being able to like see the little bits and pieces of modern day or classical Japanese in modern day Japanese and understand it. Also, I became able to read things that were written in classical Japanese grammar, like Mori Ogai's novels and some of Natsume Soseki's old like journal entries and stuff. It's not really classical Japanese. It's more like modern-ish Japanese written in classical Japanese grammar, but that's how they used to write in like the 1800s. And I became able to read that as well, and it really just felt like a superpower. And then he asked, "What would you have done differently, knowing what you know now?" Nothing, pretty much. I would it what I did worked perfectly for me. I'd recommend that you do it as well. Buy a Japanese grammar guide for classical Japanese grammar and just SRS the whole thing. And then just like if you want to continue to get better, start like go and read some of Mori Ogai's old stuff or Natsume Soseki's old stuff. Try to or like Fukuzawa Yukichi's stuff. Like find something that's not too hard, but it's written in classical Japanese grammar, and start just like making sentence cards from that, trying to get familiar with that. And yeah, it's actually not that hard if you have a good foundation in modern day Japanese. So Hamp TC asks, will you make an explanation of the mass immersion approach in Japanese for Japanese people? Yes, I will, but of course it'll be about learning English in particular, and it won't be like a one for one translation. It'll be kind of different because I'll be if my audience is Japanese, I'm going to approach it a little bit differently to make it I think more palatable for them, or make it more likely to help them understand. But yeah, I want to do that, but it's a low priority right now. And then Berserker Armor, last question, asks, serious question, what level of proficiency do you think is minimum in order to woo cute Japanese girls? And then someone replied to this, Zach Gaiek replied saying, learn how to say konnichiwa and you'll be fine. And he is completely correct. Japanese ability does not impress Japanese girls at all. In fact, knowing no Japanese is much more likely to woo them, because then you have this mysterious exotic gaijin charm and like aura and atmosphere about you. And the better you get at Japanese, the less you have of that, and the more they realize that you're just a boring old normal person, same as Japanese people, and nothing special or whatever. And like they will think that you're smart when you're good at Japanese, but they won't. There's nothing attractive about that. And like in my experience and the experience of other people, the better you get at Japanese, the less you can the like automatic points that you score with Japanese girls, the more that decreases. So if you're in it for Japanese girls, then don't bother learning the language. Huge waste of time. Just go find Japanese girls that are interested in English and have them like speak to you in broken English, and you'll have way more luck. Seriously, that's my experience. Even now, like sometimes I will compare my experience speaking to Japanese girls in Japanese and speaking to Japanese girls in English, and it goes way better in English every time. It's like so easy. So yeah, honestly, don't think that Japanese ability is going to get you girls. So yeah, that was it. It's gonna this was harder than I thought it was going to be, to be honest. Maybe I should have prepared a little bit more, but I think I'm going to get better at this in the future. I think, every time I do one of these, I'm going to get better at it. I'm going to get better at answering coherently and succinctly, and keeping a good flow so that I get a good balance of fleshing out people's questions, or fleshing out the answers to people's questions, and still answering as many questions as possible. So sorry if I I rambled in this video, but I'm gonna try. I think, practice makes perfect. This is the first one. I'm gonna improve, and then and like I said at the beginning, if your question didn't get answered, then when I post the next one of these, you can just repost your question again. If you post it like early on, it's probably more likely to get more upvotes because if you post it on the last day, then not that many people are gonna have a chance to even see your comment and upvote it. So if you really want your question answered, then try to look out for the post as soon as possible. I'll probably post it again on Wednesday, so Wednesday after next. So I hope that was useful. And actually, wait. How about you just post your questions on this post? So this post right now will be the next Q&A thread for the one in 2 weeks. I just thought of that as an idea, and I kind of like that idea. So post your questions on this thread, and I'll answer the ones that have the most votes in 2 weeks. And just want to say thanks so much for supporting me, guys. I'm really excited about working on MIA right now, and I definitely wouldn't be able to do it if it wasn't for you guys. Keep on immersing. You guys are going to get really good. So I'm looking forward to seeing all your guys' progress. So peace out, guys.